Okay, hello POLSCI 4. This is going to be a little bit different video because this is like 75 slides I normally do in class, and this takes like several days to go over. So I'm going to go over the important highlights that you should know. These notes should be available in the files section of the class. If you do not see them, let me know. And if you do have a question about certain slides as you're going through it, please let me know. Come to my office hours. I'll be more than happy to help you and go over those with you. But I want to go over and highlight the important things. So I'm going to try to keep this again like the other videos to 20 minutes so that you get a gist of what I probably will be looking for the final, and to help you understand certain concepts. So when we look at the origins of the Cold War, of course we're going to look at the three theories and how they view the Cold War. For realists, look at how the Cold War started. They would say Soviet aggression, historical expansionism. The Soviet Union takes the Eastern Bloc, establishes the Warsaw Pact. They go into North Korea, take North Korea. Same thing with Vietnam. They help out the Vietnamese, so they're spreading communism. The other idea is U.S. aggression. The U.S. is expanding their capitalist expansion. If you look at the treaties after World War II and what happened, helping out countries rebuild, we establish free trade around the world with our allies and its capitalist expansion. So you don't only look at it from the U.S. perspective, but you also have to look at it from the Soviet perspective. Was the U.S. aggressive when they were expanding? And for the Soviets, yes, they were trying to expand capitalism. So there's this power vacuum at the end of World War II, and it needed to be filled. Who were the countries that were the clear winners in World War II? Well, you had the U.S. and the Soviet Union. So they fill that power vacuum, and then they start creating spheres of influence. For the United States, it would be the West. For the Soviet Union, it'd be the Eastern Bloc. And China, other communist countries. That's how the Cold War expanded. The atomic bomb and the balance of terror. With the U.S. holding the only super weapon out there, it made the Soviet Union want to work harder to try to find and establish their own weapons so that they can keep a balance of power. But instead of calling it balance of power, and now it's balance of terror. Because if one side has nuclear weapons and the other side has nuclear weapons, you could blow each other up and destroy the whole world. So nuclear deterrence and escalation. You should probably know what nuclear deterrence is. It's also known as MAD, mutually assured destruction. When we talk about nuclear deterrence, you will not go to war against somebody that has nuclear weapons because they are able to strike back at you. So you should probably know what nuclear deterrence is. And escalation is building up more and more and more and more nuclear weapons. You should know what happens with the Cuban Missile Crisis. That goes to the heart of deterrence theory. You had the Soviet Union park missiles off Cuba. We would only have 5 minutes notice to launch our own nuclear weapons. So would that give the Soviet Union first strike? Were they able to survive a nuclear war with the United States? Of course, the United States had nuclear weapons parked in Turkey, just across the border from the Soviet Union. So it's the same thing. Again, you have to look at it from both perspectives. So alliances and proxy wars. You have the U.S., the West, versus the Soviet Union and its allies. And they would establish proxy wars. And I think I have that in the world systems. Proxy wars are used to test new weapon systems between both sides and to keep both sides from going from a Cold War to a hot war. A Cold War means there's no war. It's just cold. There's nothing going on. A hot war, the firing starts. And proxy wars keeps a hot war from happening. We see what weapon systems work, what helps, what makes us better than them in our weapon systems. So these proxy wars are test grounds to see who's better, whose ideology is better. So for realists, how did the Cold War end? Star Wars, the buildup of a satellite system that would shoot down nuclear weapons. If you had a satellite system that could shoot down nuclear weapons launched by the Soviets, you had a clear advantage over them, and you were able to ignore deterrence theory. You are now able to kill your enemy without being killed yourself. So that scared the Soviets. Again, MAD, mutually assured destruction. You do not go to war because your enemy has nuclear weapons and you don't want to destroy each other. All right, liberal interpretations. The United Nations stopped aggressive war. The whole point of the United Nations is to stop war. So that is the job of the United Nations. You should know what the United Nations are. And I think I have this in the notes later on. Truman's blundering diplomacy. Do we contain communism? We need to stop the aggression in South Korea. We will send in a police action. We won't go to actual war. Korea was a policing action. MacArthur, who's one of the generals for Truman, wants to invade China. Truman doesn't want to do that. Fires his general, and we have a stalemate in Korea because of it. You had NATO and the European community. NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You should know what NATO is. If you are attacked by somebody, we will come to your defense. The Soviets had the same thing. They called it the Warsaw Pact. But we come together for a common defense. That's a liberal perspective. The Cuban Missile Crisis from a liberal perspective, instead of going to war, war was not fought. We used diplomacy to stop the Cuban Missile Crisis from happening. So, by using diplomacy, this is a liberal perspective on how you should work with each other internationally. I'll skip on to Détente and the Helsinki Accords. The information revolution, that one's important because the world becomes a smaller place. Because with the advent of the internet and computers, it becomes easier to communicate around the world. And the Cold War, people begin to see the other side, and the old barriers break down. The Soviet Union falls apart because now the Soviet people get a taste of freedom. World systems perspective, of course. Exploitation of lesser developed countries. Why does the U.S. have allies to help exploit these poor countries and take from them? Same thing for the Soviet Union. Why do they want to expand communism? So they can take from those poor or less developed countries. For world system theorists, the spread of the world capitalist system. You have the U.S. going out and spreading democracy and free trade around the world, and that is, expanding it to the countries that are developed, and to keep the poor countries and lesser developed countries under the boot of the capitalist world system. And here again, proxy wars keep from turning the Cold War into a hot war. You fight wars within other countries, these lesser developed or poor countries, so that you don't destroy the infrastructures within your own country or your capitalist country. So you go and fight your wars for the military-industrial complex in Vietnam, Korea, African nations, the Middle East, to keep them down. All right. 6 explanations for the Cold War. You had communist totalitarian expansion. So the Soviet expansion in Eastern Europe threatened U.S. security. Soviets conquered the homelands of powerful U.S. ethnic groups like the Armenians, Azerbaijanis. So that would help us. They would advocate us to stop the Soviets from expanding even more. A lot of people thought the Cold War was a Western human rights crusade to bring about freedoms. You have freedoms. So we would go and try to fight for everybody else's rights and freedoms. If this argument is true, then why did not this crusade become more prevalent earlier? Why did we allow atrocities to happen early on? Another explanation is U.S. softness. U.S. worked early on to appease the Soviet Union. Roosevelt let Stalin have Eastern Europe. Capitalist expansion. Capitalist U.S. was the aggressor and the Soviet Union was the defender, because we were introducing free trade and money to rebuild economies in Western Europe, unshaped post-war European order, the lack of clear American-Soviet wartime agreement on the post-war European order, who gets what, or who oversees what, especially like with Germany. Bipolarity and security dilemma. When we talk about bipolarity, we have in the world after World War II, you had two superpowers. You had the Soviet Union with its spheres of influence, and you had the United States with its spheres of influence. So the world's two strongest states rarely get along with each other because each is the main threat to the other. We just don't like them because, hey, they are a threat to us. Same thing for them. We're a threat to them. So they will compete for security. We'll show off our better weapons so that if you try to attack us, we have better weapons than you do. You should know about the Korean War and what happens in the Korean War. I'm not going to go over the details because there's so much and we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to skip several slides. And when we get to a theory, we'll talk about it. That's the general that was fired by Truman, was MacArthur. Talked about bipolarity and superpowers, so just go over this and understand what superpowers are. Casualties were the arsenal of democracy for the United States. This is the United States perspective. The economy of the United States versus the economy of the Soviet Union. Again, I always ask this question of my classes: what's better for an economy? Is it, or is war good for your economy or bad for your economy? And that always depends. If you're a country that is being bombed, it is bad for your economy. If you're a country that's not being bombed and your infrastructure is intact, it's good for your economy. So for the Soviet Union at the end of World War II, it was partially bad because a lot of western part of the Soviet Union was war-torn. But the eastern part, the industrial part, was not. So they were able to rebuild. The United States wasn't bombed at all. We still had factories all over the place and we were able to build things. So these two entities still have industrial base and they're able to build up. So this is what happens with the Soviet Union and why they become the world power. Definitely know what the United Nations are. The most important thing for the United Nations is to stop all future wars. It was the successor to the League of Nations. The main idea of the United Nations is that 5 of the most powerful countries in the world will form a security council. So there's Security Council. General Assembly is like all nations. They go in, they can make rules that really don't bind countries. But the most important aspect of the United Nations is the Security Council. Functioning around and was to act in dealing with international problems and emergencies that would need immediate action. So the job of the Security Council is to keep security. It's collective security, so all the 5 most powerful countries in the world will come together and stop an aggressor nation. So representatives, these 5 countries are the most powerful and they will always have representation in the Security Council. So the United States, Soviet Union, Britain, China, and France. These 5 countries would band together and stop any aggressive nation. So we will all come together and fight to stop all future wars. Now we do have other nations that are part of the Security Council, but they don't have veto power. Those 5 have veto power. They can veto anything that happens. So if the Security Council was to take action against an aggressor country, all 5 have to agree. If one disagrees, then the Security Council can't do anything. So if there's one veto, then nothing can happen. So go through the strengths of the UN, weaknesses. I'll let you go through this on your own because, again, I'm running out of time. But you definitely know what the United Nations is, and the important part of the United Nations is the Security Council. All right, nuclear threat. Probably know about like what happens with. This is just some statistics on what happened with the atomic bomb. The Soviets started their own program in 1949. They had their own bomb. Now we've elevated the bombs. We're advancing even more. So there's a hydrogen bomb. So we go atomic, hydrogen, and then neutron bomb. All right. For deterrence theory to work, deterrence. For you to have deterrence, a country must have a second strike option. So the United States deploys 3 weapon systems to give us the ability to strike back against the Soviet Union. So you should know the nuclear triad. You should know deterrence theory. What the United States develops is 3 weapon systems that will allow us to strike back if we come under attack by the Soviet Union. So, first of the 3, long-range bombers, B-52, B-2. You put bombs on a plane, they fly off, they go bomb. They drop the bomb. Of course, these are the easiest of the 3 to take out. So if you can take out all our bombers, we still have 2 weapon systems to deliver nuclear weapons so that the Soviet Union knows not to attack us. That's how deterrence theory works. Second, ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Launched from your homeland, goes into space, and then falls into your enemy country. These could theoretically also be taken out. We talked about Star Wars earlier. This is the second easiest to take out of the 3. So bombers easy, they're easy to find. Same thing with ballistic missiles as long as you're able to hit them. The hardest of the 3 is SLBMs or submarine launched ballistic missiles. So subs is your third part of the trident to deliver nuclear weapons. If you take out the first 2, you have to find subs. Subs are very hard to find in the ocean. They can be anywhere, and they can launch. And if they're really close to your country, they can take you out within a few minutes. So submarines become the most powerful weapon in our nuclear arsenal, and that's why we try to work on keeping our subs quiet. They worked on keeping their subs quiet so they could not be found. As long as the subs are still out there, you should not be able to attack your enemy because they will be able to strike back. So that's nuclear deterrence. Theory that states there will be no nuclear war because of mutually assured destruction. So first and second strike capability. First strike, launch nuclear weapons against an enemy without worry of nuclear retaliation. If somebody reaches first strike capability, then nuclear war happens. You take out your enemy, you live on. Second strike, they're able to strike back. If nuclear weapons are launched against one country, that country has the capacity to launch back. And game over, everybody's dead. So for nuclear deterrence or MAD to work, there's first strike capability and second strike capability. If somebody reaches first strike, game over, one side loses. As long as you keep second strike, there will be no nuclear war because everybody dies. So countries keep a second strike option, there will be no nuclear war. The U.S. has the nuclear triad to keep a second strike option. That's why we have 3 weapon systems. You take out 1, we still have 2. You take out 2, we still have 1. Very hard to take out all 3. Which I've already talked about. Arms race, just building more and more and more and more nuclear weapons. I'm going to go past that. You should know about Europe after World War II. Divided Germany. We had in East and West Germany for about almost 50 years. In East and West Germany, they are now united today. The Yalta Conference, you should know what happens at Yalta. So I would go over that. It divides Europe into 4 zones. Who has what? So be sure to go over that. So the 2 Germanys, one under the sphere of the Soviet Union, the other under the sphere of the U.S. So one's capitalist, one's communist. Same thing with Europe. You have the Eastern Bloc countries that are under the Soviet sphere. They are communist governments. And you have Western Europe, which is under the U.S. sphere, which are democratic. So you should know what the Eastern Blocs are. You should know what Iron Curtain is, what Churchill calls the Iron Curtain. I won't have you can go over the statement of what he talks about with the Iron Curtain. Containment policy. You should know what containment policy is. What Truman wants to do is contain communism. So we will surround communism with other countries. We will have treaties with other countries. So you have NATO in Europe. You have MITO, which is the Middle East. You have Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. You have these organizations. If you look at where these treaty organizations are, they're around the Soviet Union to contain communism. So containment policy is to contain communism. If there is a communist aggressive action taken against a country that is free, then the United States will come and help. We want to contain communism for Truman. That's what Truman wants. Those are the different treaty organizations. Japan, if you look at those 4 treaty organizations, it surrounds the whole Soviet Union. You probably want to know what the Berlin airlift is. The Soviet Union blocks off Berlin from getting medical supplies and food. So we airlift in those supplies. Almost came to war over this. Not only Berlin is within all of East Germany under communist influence, but there's East Berlin and West Berlin. West Berlin again is free under the U.S. sphere. East Berlin is under Soviet control. So the Soviet Union blocks off the corridor of trade into West Berlin, so they try to choke West Berlin off, but we just airlift in everything that's needed by the people of West Berlin. The Marshall Plan, you should know what the Marshall Plan is. Really what the Marshall Plan is we will give economic aid to Europe to rebuild. Instead of punishing, like after World War I, we punished Germany. We made them pay all reparations. Now we're going to come in and spend money and help rebuild these countries. So that's what the Marshall Plan is. I know I'm going fast, but I'm like at 23 minutes now. So we talked about NATO. NATO is a North Atlantic Treaty Organization. If you come under attack, we will defend you. So you had the Warsaw Pact in Eastern Europe, and that divided Europe. You had NATO on one side in the west. You had the Warsaw Pact in the east. Just go through this. If you have any questions, I'll be available. All right, and that's it. So if you have any questions, I know I went through this pretty fast. It was like a lot of slides. But if you do have any questions, please let me know. I'll be more than happy to help you. Come to my office hours. I'll be there. And we will see you for the next video. Have a good day. Bye.